Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take a short call on this bill at this stage to make some comments about what the Greens have said in relation to this bill, because New Zealand First does have a different approach to them. Although I do respect the fact that the Greens are very much of a mind to preserve and improve human rights, and indeed New Zealand First, and I particularly am interested in doing so as well. However, it has to be admitted that there are, as there are in this case, tensions often between personal rights and the public interest. And the plain truth is that there are some people who are imprisoned and who are then eligible for release, but who remain a danger to the community. And we have actually seen in recent years some fairly spectacular examples of that. Therefore, this is not an issue that can be ignored, and New Zealand First consequently embraces this bill and welcomes the initiative taken to deal with that situation, however uncomfortable it may be. Because the real crux of the bill is simply this: is an order really necessary? Because if it is, then it is not a question of punishment, it is a question of protecting the public interest. And so I'm glad to see that the court must not find that it should issue an order unless it finds that there is a very high risk of further offending. So it must be, the presumption is that there will not be grounds for an order and that this has to be proved. So the court must be satisfied that the respondent exhibits a severe disturbance in behavioural functioning established by evidence of specified characteristics to a high level. That is a high bar, and so it should be. And it is true that there are people who fall into that category. And these people are not necessarily mentally disordered. If they were, then we have a regime for the committal of those people to mental facilities. However, there is a gap between that and those who are entitled to freedom, and that gap is where there is a person who is not mentally disordered and who would ordinarily be entitled to their freedom, but who are considered to be so dangerous that they cannot be allowed to go free. A very, very small number of people, but history has demonstrated they do exist, and this legislation is necessary to deal with them in the view of New Zealand First. And I note concerning the review provisions that the committee has added clauses 17.2 and 2A to require a court reviewing a PPO to consider whether the subject still poses a very high risk of imminent, serious sexual or violent offending. Take into account the reports provided to the court, and there will be plenty of evidence for them because the reports of 2 psychologists or psychiatrists are needed, and the person themselves can obtain a similar report. So the matter would be properly investigated, and I feel sure that we will not see New Zealand courts, with the benefit of that sort of information, lightly making an order for the detaining of these people. So I cannot agree with the approach taken by the Greens, which I feel is too extreme. It goes to the point of saying, well, maybe there's a problem, but human rights are so important that we just have to ignore this problem. Well, New Zealand First doesn't feel that. We acknowledge that there is a problem. We acknowledge that there are people in this category, while at the same time acknowledging the importance of human rights. So we say that this bill is sufficiently well drafted to protect people from arbitrary imprisonment, even those who have been in prison for serious sexual or violent offences, Mr Chairman,
Dennis O'Rourke.
and who therefore should be subject to one of these orders. So we feel that the tension between personal rights and the need for public protection is still adequately covered with this legislation. We do not feel that this legislation, the way it is drafted, would result in people losing their freedom without that high bar of evidence having been achieved. And I would expect that only a handful, literally a handful of people would ever be subject to those orders. But of course we are going to have reports to Parliament and there's going to be good supervision. So if we find that there are a lot more people who are detained in this way, then Parliament will know and will have an opportunity to review the legislation. So I think that the situation is so serious that the legislation, this bill is warranted, that it is well drafted, that it is well balanced. The protection of the individual is still maintained, but this very serious problem is dealt with, and the public has a right to expect that Parliament will act in this way to protect them, because there have been problems, serious problems in the recent past, and we simply can't afford to not do anything about them. So I'm afraid that I think that the Greens have gone too far in terms of the protection of human rights without taking into account extreme circumstances. And these would be extraordinary and extreme circumstances where a person would be subject to this sort of order. So New Zealand First will continue to support the bill for those reasons.